In my ongoing series on ways to fix the Hoenn region, I've come across a fair number of Gen 3 Pokemon that you basically have no reason to use during a playthrough short of wanting to make things harder. These are Pokemon whose entire existence seems to be purely about filling the Pokedex and weren't given much thought put into their stats or abilities. In this video, I've chosen 14 Hoenn Pokemon that I think could use a bit of a makeover. Now this won't be me looking at every weak Pokemon and saying, this is how we make them top tier in Smogon. Like, you won't be seeing Beautifly or Dustox here. Those Pokemon serve the purpose of being weak early game bug Pokemon. They don't need to be Pinsir or Heracross. In contrast to them, the Pokemon I'll be improving here serve no such purpose. There's no reason they shouldn't have been at least halfway decent or had some of their biggest issues fixed. The most infamous example of this is Tropius, one of the best designs in the whole series. Tropius was a Pokemon young me loved, but every time I tried to use it in-game, it was awful. Tropius has a bad typing that makes it weak to 3 of the strongest attacking types: Rock, Fire, and a quad weakness to Ice. A water resistance seems nice until you realize that every water type in the game can learn Ice Beam, so you're not exactly protected from anything. Its stats don't do it any favors either, despite Tropius having a capable move pool. 99, 83, 87 would be a pretty solid string of defensive stats on a Pokemon with a good defensive typing. Milotic, Miltank, they could function well with those stats. But Tropius can't because all 3 of its major weaknesses are extremely common, making otherwise decent defensive stats kind of underwhelming in this context. The easiest way to help Tropius there is to give it Thick Fat as one of its abilities, neutralizing its fire weakness and making ice moves hit it for double damage instead of quadruple damage. The ability fits Tropius, it's a big dinosaur plant, we should expect it to have thick skin. We would see that same logic applied to Mega Venusaur in Gen 6. I'd also make a slight modification to its stats, giving Tropius a 20-point boost to its physical attack and special defense, bringing it up to a base stat total of 500, the same as Pokemon like Poliwrath and Rapidash. A Pokemon designed after one of the coolest dinosaurs should have stats on that caliber. This version of Tropius is now a lot better at taking hits while also being a bit more capable of dishing them out, taking it from outright bad to a Pokemon that can be annoying to take down in the right situations. Fun fact about Tropius, it was the first Pokemon ever distributed in a Cherish Ball, the special all-red Pokeball we only see for event Pokemon. Then we've got Carnivine, another really cool grass type that suffers the same way Tropius does. Amazing design, but what in God's name were they doing with its stats? A standalone Pokemon based off the Venus Flytrap of all things should be really dangerous, but Carnivine isn't. A base stat total of 454 just isn't enough for anything but the most well thought out Pokemon, which Carnivine isn't. All of its stats except for its speed are average at best, and its ability does nothing for it. Grass already resists ground-type attacks, and this isn't a Flygon situation where the Pokemon is obviously flying but can't be a flying type, so you need to give it Levitate for it to make sense. There's no ability in the game that does what I'd want Carnivine's ability to do, so let's just make one up. When something makes contact with a Venus Flytrap, the plant starts closing its jaws, so Carnivine's new ability would work this way. If a physical attack is used against it, an effect similar to Future Sight and Doom Desire would be set. Whichever Pokemon is in on the opponent's side after 2 turns will be hit with a 90 power move powered by Carnivine's HP stat that does neutral damage to all Pokemon. There's no move in the history of Pokemon that does that, but this effect would fit perfectly with a Venus Flytrap. This ability would make Carnivine the most dangerous pivot we've ever seen. You can't use a contact move against it unless you want to see one of your Pokemon take massive damage. And here's where we get to fixing its stats. Venus Flytraps are tough. They've been known to survive forest fires by closing up and going into a protective mode, so Carnivine should have great defenses. If its ability is going to be based off its HP and Carnivine needs to be switching in a lot, we need to boost that considerably. A 51-point boost to 125 HP puts Carnivine's ability on the level of a Zapdos Thunderbolt. But even with that boost, Carnivine's base stat total is still below the likes of Tentacruel and Porygon 2. Then we'll drop its speed to 1, mainly to give me points to put elsewhere, but it does fit Venus Flytraps. Even when they're eating, they're incredibly slow moving, so let's just go all the way with that and make Carnivine the speed version of what Shedinja is to HP. Those 45 points would go into its special defense, bringing it up to a base 117. Then we pull 45 points from its physical attack and do the same for its physical defense. This puts Carnivine at a base stat total of 505, matching Machamp. For a standalone Pokemon, that seems really fair, but Carnivine wouldn't be overpowered. Its ability only activates when it's hit by a physical attack, while two of its biggest weaknesses, Ice and Fire, are special types in Gen 3 and mainly used by special attackers in the following generations. Up next is one of Game Freak's biggest misfires. I never understood why Game Freak would make a Pokemon with amazing stats and then give them an ability that cuts them off at the knees. You know what you could have done if you didn't want to make Slaking overpowered? Maybe not give it a base stat total that matches the box art legendaries. Slaking is the only time in this video you'll see me simply lowering a Pokemon's stats, because I want this Pokemon to be playable without being a cheat code. Like, why does this thing have 95 special attack? Drop that by 30 so it matches Snorlax's special attack. But a base stat total of 640 is still a bit much, so let's drop its physical attack to 140, meaning it's no longer more powerful than Groudon and Rayquaza, which it shouldn't have been to begin with. As for its new ability, let's give it Oblivious. It still fits with the lazy sloth vibe, but doesn't make Slaking any more powerful. Following Slaking is a duo, Volbeat and Illumise, Hoenn's resident mid-game bugs, taking the spot that Venomoth and Pinsir occupied in Gen 1, followed by Fortress and Heracross in Gen 2. Despite that, these two have stats that are confusingly barely better than the early game bugs. Their stats line up very obviously, Volbeat having better physical attack and Illumise having better special attack. I want to expand those differences, and you'll see what I mean once I get to altering their stats. Despite their names though, Game Freak decided to give the ability Illuminate to Volbeat. Now, Illuminate doesn't have any competitive usage, but what if it did? What if Illuminate boosted the power of any move that involved light or lightning? This would be great for a special attacker like Illumise, essentially giving it a stab boost on electric type moves. This would help it a lot given that Bug was a physical type in Gen 3, meaning Illumise had a hard time using its own type on offense. Replacing Illuminate, I would give Volbeat Flash Fire given that, like Illumise, it's based off Fireflies. If this were the case, Volbeat would have been the only non-fire type to get Flash Fire as an ability until Roly-Coly. This would completely nullify Volbeat's fire weakness and give it a pinch of defensive utility. Now we get to expanding their differences. Instead of just swapping attacking stats, I'd want these two to be even more functionally different, with Volbeat being a slower, bulkier physical attacker, while Illumise is a fast special attacker. Turning Illumise into such a Pokemon is pretty simple. Boost its speed by 20 points and boost its special attack by 30 points, now giving it a base stat total of 450, right in line with Venomoth. I'd also fix its level up learn set a bit. Illumise only learns normal type moves by level up, aside from a single dark move, and it only gets 3 damaging moves that way. Think like a kid. Who catches a cool bug Pokemon just to use normal type moves? 7 of the 10 moves Illumise learns by level up are support moves, which aren't that fun to use in a regular playthrough. Competitively, these moves would make a better version of Illumise interesting, but let's also give it some good attacks to work with to stand out on your casual team, with those attacks being Signal Beam at level 15, Tail Glow at level 23, Fire Punch at level 30, and Thunderbolt at level 35. Now with Volbeat, I'd start by dropping its speed by 15 points down to a base 70, giving us 65 points to work with. 20 points apiece are going to its HP and physical defense to give it some actual staying power. Not against the best Pokemon, but against average Pokemon, and that's really the bar here. I want these Pokemon to be capable of completing playthroughs as part of your team, not getting casted off around the 7th gym when they become too much of a hassle to use. The remaining 25 points are getting split between its physical attack and special defense. These changes make both Pokemon pretty useful at any stage in the game. Volbeat especially could single-handedly take down the first Elite Four member, while Illumise would be helpful against Glacia, packing Fire Punch and Thunderbolt. Moving on, we get to another pair of Pokemon, the two evolutions of Clamperl, Gorebyss and Huntail. Right off the bat, why are two Pokemon based off eels, one of the faster aquatic animals, so damn slow? At least one of them should have a base speed of 100, and I'm going to give that to Gorebyss, taking 30 points out of its physical attack and 20 points out of its physical defense to now give it a base speed of 102, fitting of its sleek design. Huntail, on the other hand, is a totally different story. Its design looks more like a trap, like it would shimmy under the sand and leave its tail exposed to attract prey, then snap when they've been drawn in. Its Pokédex entries back up that assumption, and also speak of it having great eyesight. For that reason, I think it should have the ability Compound Eyes and be much more bulky, dropping its special attack by 30 points to go into its HP, then dropping its speed by 30 and putting it into its special defense. Surprisingly, this wouldn't make Huntail that much better in Gen 3 because its move pool is heinous, lacking anything to set it apart from Gorebyss, and that's what I'd fix next. The goal with Huntail's move pool would be to make it an annoyance, something that makes you feel trapped just like its prey. This would involve giving it access to Glare, Wrap, and Perish Song. Compound Ice helps out both Glare and Wrap, and all three moves help to emulate Huntail slowly stalking its prey. But if you wanted to run a more aggressive Huntail, letting it learn Earthquake and Iron Tail could help with that, given that all water moves were special attacks in Gen 3. Let's keep things going with 2 more water Pokemon. Given how much of Hoenn is set on the water, it's weird that we've got 4 water Pokemon that really didn't have much going on. Making these Pokemon both more available and more interesting could have gone a long way in making the endless water routes more fun. Wailord, a meme in many ways, but with a very weird stat distribution. Like, why does Wailord have above average attacking stats? It's based on filter feeding whales who are only dangerous when you're in the way of one of them breaching. On a similar note, why are its physical and special defense stats lower than Mudkip's? Real simple way to fix Wailord. Say to hell with its offensive stats. Give it 90 in both defensive stats instead of both attacking stats. It won't be dishing out much damage, but that amazing 170, 90, 90 defensive stat line should let it win the war of attrition a decent amount of the time, especially during in-game playthroughs. That's what you would expect a big whale to be, a Pokemon that just eats up hits and brushes them off easily. Moving on, can someone explain to me why Luvdisc even exists? It has putrid stats and doesn't evolve into anything. We've seen more complete cut Pokemon in beta leaks, so how the hell did this one make it into a final release? Given that they share a color and both have pointed snouts, I think the way you fix Luvdisc is by having it evolve into Gorebyss. These could work as version exclusives, with Clamperl and now its only evolution Huntail being exclusive to Sapphire, while Luvdisc and Gorebyss are exclusive to Ruby. Otherwise, you have no real reason to catch Luvdisc, especially with how late in the game you're able to find one. Now we reach Banette, a Pokemon I've talked about before in my Ghost Pokemon video. Banette is another case of stats that don't make any sense, having 60s in all but its 2 attacking stats, a mediocre special attack and a pretty good physical attack. The way you fix Banette is to make it Gen 3's version of Gengar. So many Hoenn Pokemon were given oddly low base stat totals, and Banette is no exception, only hitting 455 despite being the evolution of a Pokemon you only find 60% of the way into a playthrough. Let's turn Banette into a dangerous physical ghost, fitting of its past as a doll that was thrown away, the pain of abandonment making it exceptionally evil. We'll start by dropping its special attack into the 50s and raising its physical attack to a base 133, just below the likes of Metagross and Salamence. This would coincide with its speed hitting a base 113, right between Gengar and Starmie. That leaves us with 9 points left over before it hits the Gengar benchmark of 500, so let's put those into its physical defense. Suddenly, we've turned Banette into a really strong threat that can work on any team and would likely be a staple of Hoenn playthroughs, finally giving it trainers that want to keep it around. Now we move on to 2 rivals, both victims of Hoenn's weird proclivity to leave a lot of its Pokemon underpowered. A base stat total of 458 for a standalone Pokemon was kinda pathetic even back then. We've seen Game Freak correct this mistake with stronger Pokemon, like Magmar getting an evolution in Gen 4 despite having a base stat total of 495, the same as Nidoking. Zangoose is a really easy fix. I think you just need to make it a bit faster and a bit stronger. Normal is a great attacking type because only 3 types give it trouble. Raise Zangoose's attack to 125 and its speed to 101, then give it 10-point boosts to both of its defenses. Even with all those boosts though, it's still barely got a base stat total higher than Magmar, but now it's way better, and that's on top of its awesome design. One more thing though, I would give it Guts as a secondary ability, holding that space until it gets Toxic Boost as a signature ability in Gen 5. To this day, it's still the only Pokemon with that ability. Onto Seviper, we've got another case of Huntail syndrome, but now with a more competent move pool. Seviper actually has pretty good moves to annoy its opponents, which has made it one of my favorite oddities to use competitively. Nobody knows what this thing can do, and while it doesn't do a lot, it can surprise some people. While Zangoose is an all-out assault, Seviper should be a more versatile all-arounder. Having 100 for both of its attacking stats is a good start, as is having Shedskin as an ability, meaning you can't count on limiting it with status moves. Being a poison type also makes it immune to Toxic. There's already a good foundation here, so to improve upon it, let's start by dropping its speed by 10 points to now have 60 points to work with, and we'll spread them out by giving 20 points apiece to its HP, physical defense, and special defense. With just a few tweaks, we've turned a solid attacker into a prime threat, and its fiercest rival into a decently strong defensive option. Castform feels like a missed opportunity. See my original Fixing Hoenn video. Hoenn was the generation that put the biggest focus on weather, and Castform was the non-legendary avatar of that focus, changing forms as the weather changed. Despite that, it wasn't given a form for sandstorms, and its stats don't change depending on the form, thus not letting each form have its own identity. The only thing that does change, aside from Castform's type, is the power and type of its signature move, Weather Ball. Normally, it's a 50 base power normal type move, but its power doubles and its type changes during a weather condition, making it a really good move. Mega Charizard Ys have been picking it over Flamethrower in competitive play for a long time, and in Gen 3, Sandstorm Weather Ball was the strongest rock move in the game despite Castform not having a sand form. The way you fix Castform is by tweaking its stats and altering its ability. Let's start by boosting all of its stats to a base 80, the same as Glalie. This gives it the bulk to reliably set up its preferred weather condition. Now here comes the forecast boost. With the new version, not only would it change Castform's form, but it would also make it so that any weather summoning move Castform uses has its number of turns increased from 5 to 8, on par with the Weather Rock items that got introduced in Gen 4. Not only is this good for Castform, it's also amazing for certain teammates. Now let's get to altering its stats depending on its forms, just like the evolutions. I'm thinking a bulky special attacker for its water form, a fast special attacker for its fire form, a glass cannon mixed attacker for its ice form, and then a quick physical attacker for its rock form. Aside from Aerodactyl and Kabutops, no rock type in Gens 1 through 3 had a base speed of 80 or higher. These are how I envision Castform's stats looking in its different forms. Suddenly, that mediocre gift Pokemon you got at the Weather Institute is now making an argument to be a mainstay on your team for the rest of the game. Given the different stats across different forms, Smogon might have a problem tiering Castform, but that's not my problem. I think these could be really fun in-game, especially for people just learning how the weather mechanics work. Moving on, one of my biggest gripes with Pokemon design is when a pre-evolution has a base stat that is significantly higher than its final form. That is the case with Anorith, the third fastest rock type in all of Pokemon as of Gen 3. Why does it lose 30 points of speed upon evolving into Armaldo? Yes, I get it. Its Pokédex entry says it lives on land now that it's evolved, which might make it move slower, but it also describes it as using its large wings to hunt for prey underwater, which would assumedly mean it moves much faster in that environment. We'd actually see that assumption confirmed when Gen 5 gave it the ability Swift Swim, but even with a Swift Swim boost, it's still pathetically slow in what should be its prime hunting grounds. So to fix Armaldo, let's have it be a fast physical threat, since Anorith's stats really imply it'll evolve into exactly that kind of Pokemon. Armaldo already has the physical attack for it, it's just so undercut by its awful speed stat, even when activating the speed boosting ability it wouldn't get for 7 years. Let's assume Armaldo doesn't get slower, thus starting with a base 75 speed, which we will then boost to a base 101, then help it further by giving it Swift Swim in its debut generation instead of making it have to wait until Generation 5. But to not bloviate its base stat total, we'll also be dropping its special attack by 20 points. Let's also give Anorith Signal Beam at level 20, so that people using these Pokemon during regular playthroughs aren't stuck with Fury Cutter as their only bug move, which both Anorith and Armaldo don't get until the mid-level 40s? What the hell? Now at a base stat total of 531, Armaldo is barely stronger than Aggron stats-wise, so it's not overpowered at all, but it's also faster than a few notable Pokemon it could be a serious threat to. With Armaldo now having Swift Swim on top of its much better speed, along with Forecast boosting weather move duration, I could see Castform Armaldo cores being pretty relevant competitively, especially since Tyranitar can't switch in safely on Armaldo. Maybe go with Castform Armaldo Zapdos, then Metagross for a bit more Tyranitar insurance, a bulky Ludicolo to blunt Starmies, and Skarmory for spikes, phasing, and general Dragon Dance Salamence protection. That sounds like a really fun team to take advantage of two Pokemon that got significantly improved in this video. Finishing things off, we'll tackle Mawile. From a design perspective, Mawile always stuck out to me as Pokemon's version of the Piranha Plant from Mario, until Scovillain got introduced. Despite having two fantastic abilities on its debut, Mawile is god-awful in Gen 3. Unless your name was Metagross, Steel types in Gen 3 didn't have a single good Steel type attack to work with. Iron Head and Bullet Punch wouldn't come around until Gen 4, Jirachi's signature move Doom Desire is terrible, and Iron Tail's 75% accuracy isn't cutting it either. In Mawile's case, it's somehow even worse. It can't learn a single damaging Steel type move. It relies entirely on running Hidden Power Steel if it wants to use a Steel attack at all, and good luck finding one with the correct IVs for that in a normal playthrough. Steel had been around since Generation 2, and there still wasn't a decent widespread Steel type attack. What were they even doing with this type? It cannot be understated how much having a single good same type attack helps a Pokemon, both competitively and in in-game playthroughs. Like if you had a Charizard as a kid, you spammed Flamethrower. If you had a Sceptile, you spammed Leaf Blade, because that was fun. But where's the fun in using Mawile during a playthrough of the original Gen 3 games if every battle is a chore because all of the moves it gets barely do anything? It only learns normal and dark type attacks by level up when it's neither of those types, and the moves it learns aren't even good ones. Mawile is a physical attacker with awful special attack, yet the best move it learns by level up is a special attack in Gen 3 back when typing determined if a move was physical or special. That's not thoughtful game design, that's just plain stupid. In this case, we would start by introducing a new move entirely, Iron Fangs, which Mawile would learn at level 1 in place of Astonish, making it Mawile's default move. Every single one of Mawile's Pokedex entries mentions it biting stuff for obvious reasons, yet Game Freak didn't give it a Steel type move that played into that. It makes no sense. We'll give Iron Fangs 85 base power with 100% accuracy, along with an increased chance to critical hit. And more than anything, spread the move out. Give it to Steelix, give it to Scizor, give it to Aggron, these really cool Steel types that didn't get access to Meteor Mash. That's a big part of what held these Pokemon back in Gen 3. Unless your name was Metagross, Steel type attacks sucked. So when starting to fix Mawile, we're also helping 3 other really cool Pokemon. Now aside from Granite Cave and Ruby, the only places you can find Mawile are in pretty powerful locations. The Cave of Origin, Victory Road, the goddamn Sky Pillar, and yet it's another example of a standalone Hoenn Pokemon that's garbage for no reason. Even when Mega Evolutions were first announced 10 years after Mawile's debut, no one was pegging Game Freak to remember this weird little one-off Steel type that looked more like a Star Ocean enemy than a Pokemon. I say that lovingly, I was actually one of the few people hoping for Mawile. I am a child of Gen 3. But let's assume that Mega Evolution isn't in the cards, and we just want Mawile to be a good Pokemon on its own. With Iron Fangs and the abilities it already has, we're off to a good start. Plus, Pure Steel is a pretty decent typing. But its stats need a lot of work. What is it with Game Freak giving so many Pokemon stats that do one thing kinda okay, and then it's just garbage everywhere else? For starters, Mawile's physical attack stat is getting boosted. A 40-point jump to base 125 would put it on the level of Heracross, another cool standalone Pokemon. Let's then give its HP a 35-point boost to make its good physical defense stat actually mean something, and give its special defense a 20-point boost to make it at least average. Lastly, we're gonna bring its speed up to a base 65, tying it with Seviper and notably outspeeding Tyranitar. A base stat total of 490 makes it equal to Pokemon like Tauros and Kangaskhan, 2 other standalone Pokemon that have always been good for in-game runs and also seen competitive relevancy. These stats make Mawile more than capable of holding its own late into the game, though it would get majorly overshadowed by Metagross in competitive play. While Mawile can also run Intimidate, Metagross is just faster, stronger, and bulkier. Where Mawile would really shine is in casual playthroughs. Steel types are hard to train and hard to find. Metagross and Registeel aren't available until really late into the game, Jirachi's event exclusive, and Aeron doesn't become decent until it evolves into Lairon at level 32. But if this version of Mawile was in the original Hoenn games, players of Ruby would have an awesome Steel type available to them before the second gym. Would that make it overpowered this early into Hoenn playthroughs? Surprisingly, no. Brawly's fighting types are super effective against Mawile. Watson's electric types attack Mawile's weaker special defense stat and resist its main attacks. Then Flannery's fire types would just cook it. Mawile being this strong so early into a playthrough doesn't break the game, it just makes Mawile more fun to have on your team. So what do you think of these ideas, and what Pokemon would you change if you could? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and check out my previous Pokemon videos linked on screen now. Thank you for watching!